Seahawk podcast.
Welcome to the Military Seahawk podcast. My name is James McNeil, and today we are brought to you by Hawk Talk, also found on TealTV. And today with us we have Melanie Nelson. Melanie works in the Military Resource Lounge. She works with veterans as well as military-affiliated students to help us get more acquainted with what college life is going to be like. I've had the pleasure of working with Melanie on a few projects, and it is a pleasure to have her here today. How you doing, Melanie?
I'm doing good, James. What a lovely introduction.
I guess we just dive right in because we got a lot of questions to cover and a lot of things to learn about the mind of Melanie Nelson.
Oh boy, here we go.
Oh boy, here we go. When you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I had no idea. Every time somebody would ask, I never had a good answer. And people ask that question to little kids like a lot, like in kindergarten and first grade and second grade and so on and so forth. And I just never had a good answer.
Someone asked, a friend of mine has a child, and someone asked her child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said an adult.
Well, isn't that the best answer of all?
That one wins the internet, honestly.
Yeah.
So my next question would be, did it change? But since you didn't have a plan, when did your plan really start to come into focus for what you wanted to do as an adult?
It didn't. All throughout grade school and high school and even into college, I would still have said I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. Didn't have a good plan there. I think I knew there were certain things that I liked better than other things, but I always kind of had a sense that I didn't know enough about the world yet. Like I hadn't seen all the options, so I wasn't quite able to choose.
I could definitely understand that. We talked a lot about what I wanted to do when I grew up, and of course my option was I didn't want to grow up. Which
you have largely succeeded at. I'm just kidding.
I have largely succeeded, and I'm quite proud of that.
Yeah.
So at what point did you decide to go in the military, and what led you to that decision?
So I come from a military family. My dad served in the military. Both of my grandfathers served. And when it came down to it, my older brother had taken an ROTC scholarship to go to school. And even though I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, I had a feeling that I would really like college. I was always a really good student in high school. I liked the structured format. And I wanted to go to college, but I didn't want to have to pay for it. And I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got out of college. I went in as an undeclared major. That was how little I knew about what I wanted to be doing. So it seemed like a good decision for me. My older brother was frankly not as good of a student as I was, but he was able to get his full college degree paid for. And so the challenge was on for me to be able to do the same. So I ended up with a Navy ROTC scholarship. And at that point, it was like, well, yes, I'm going to be in the military when I graduate. And at least it gave me an answer, right, for what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, it doesn't matter. But right now, I'm going into the military as soon as I graduate.
And as we know, the military is definitely not the place where you grow up.
Exactly, which is why, again, it doesn't really matter what's going to happen when I grow up. The military will take care of me for a few years and allow me to delay that hashtag adulting that we like to talk about.
What was your job in the military?
I was a surface warfare officer.
Tell us about that.
So a surface warfare officer is kind of a jack of all trades. Although we would tell you that really we're the master of all trades, and you don't need to know which ones we're not actually the master on because we can fake it till we make it, and it'll be fine. So it's kind of the classic occupation specialty in the Navy where we go on ships and drive them out to sea and prepare for naval battles. I don't know, do humanitarian missions, things like that.
So a lot of preparing to do a lot of things.
Yes.
Sounds like life in the Army.
Yeah.
Tell me something you liked about your job.
So I actually liked that we're considered a jack of all trades because it gives you a real sense of confidence. And I don't think I had that in my life prior to becoming a naval officer and prior to becoming qualified as a surface warfare officer. I think because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, it kind of gives you a sense of like, well, what am I really worth in this world? But when you learn how to have the situational awareness to do the job of being a surface warfare officer, and you learn how to become competent quickly in lots of different things. It kind of gives you this sense of infallibility of I can walk in anywhere and do anything, and most other people in this world can't say that with the same level of confidence, arrogance, whatever you'd like to call it, that surface warfare officers do.
Most definitely. I can feel that. I can definitely understand your point of view there. In the Army, I started off as an aircraft electrician, and then I learned operations, and I learned, of course, everyone in the Army learns how to be a good security guard, but every time a task was thrown at me, I was able to do it, and it built up my confidence, or as you said, some people might say arrogance. Well, of course I'm that good. And sometimes occurrences do bring you back down to earth a little bit and make you realize you can do a lot, you can't do it all.
True.
Was there anything that you didn't like about your job? Aside from, of course, the fact that you were in the Navy. Go Army.
All right now. Well, no, actually. So there were a lot of things I didn't like about my job. There's a reason I'm no longer in, right? But there were things that I liked about it, but I think overall the surface warfare officer community can be kind of vicious. Knowledge is power, and people don't like to share that knowledge. And unfortunately, I'm a teacher, and I'm a learner. I'm a learner's learner. I like to be taught things and to kind of work one-on-one with people and learn more about what they're doing. And all of that takes time sometimes, and nobody ever seemed to have time for me. And actually, as I was coming up on the ship where I was stationed, I was on a destroyer, so a small boy is what we would call it. And I kind of gained a reputation for I was the one that they would assign all the other junior officers who were having trouble learning their watch stations. They would assign them to my watch team because I was the one who would train them and teach them how to do the job. Even though I'm certainly not the best person, I'm not the best ship handler on the seas, let's say. But I understood how to teach what I had to learn through brute force, basically, because nobody would take the time to teach us. When I first was commissioned and was assigned to my ship, there used to be a 6-month training school that they would send newly minted naval officers from the Naval Academy and ROTC graduates, and they would send you off to Newport, Rhode Island for 6 months and send you on these little toy boats, and you'd learn how to drive a ship. But they dropped that and decided that computer-based training was all we needed, and their version of computer-based training was literally a bunch of CDs that had trivia on them, and you would memorize that and take a multiple-choice test, and voila, you're able to go out and drive a ship, right? So we learned everything on the job, and that takes a lot of energy to do that in the midst of, learning to do multiple jobs, because you never have just one job. You're always doing everything because you're a jack of all trades. So I think that was the main thing I didn't like about that particular community was if you wanted to be a teacher, you had to really carve out space for it, and really had to learn how to advocate for that, which took a while in the midst of, all the other day-to-day duties. And I would get very frustrated when I could, when I would ask for somebody, well, can you explain this to me more? Tell me where to find the information. I'll go read about it myself, but just tell me where. And they'd give you this smug look and shake their heads, and they were going to hold that knowledge because that was power over you. I would delay your qualification, right? And that sounds really like mean girl-ish, but that's what it was a lot. So I was kind of glad to remove myself from that community.
My favorite phrase about that is very clique-ish.
Yeah.
And a lot of social organizations have cliques, and people don't realize the military does too. If you are in good with the person who runs the clique, then you're going to do well. I was junior enlisted. I didn't go in the officer side. I was just, quite frankly, not qualified. But I always had the same thought process around sharing knowledge. A rising tide lifts all ships. We can all do better when we all know. And working with people that kept knowledge to themselves is very frustrating, because I don't believe... okay, I was going to say I don't believe in secret information. There are some things you need to keep close to the vest. Anyone who's dealt with security issues knows that. But if you have people that you can trust with regular information and you're not giving it to them, that lowers morale. When I was placed in charge of soldiers, I never had a problem getting them to do anything because I didn't hold information from them. If it affected them, they had a right to know, and they did know, and they responded by being very loyal to me as a leader. I'm sure you felt that as well. You had people that you were able to share information with that turned around and became very loyal to you as an officer because you treated them with respect. Would you say that's the case?
I would. You have those moments where you suddenly realize, like, yep, this training was effective, and I taught that guy how to do that, and now we can talk to each other on a different level, and it's less like me tearing my hair out going, no, we talked about how to move the engines to do that turn without dumping everybody's soup in their plate. How many times do I have to say it? To, hey, good job, great watch, you got it. I'm going to be over here updating the PowerPoint, and you just keep things going. There's a really wonderful moment where you can sort of turn the reins over to somebody else and say, it's going to be okay now. I don't have to be constantly, monitoring everything.
There is no finer feeling in the world for someone who likes to teach than when the person you're teaching gets it. And especially when it makes your job easier and you don't have to hold their hand.
So, funny story. I had been training someone on the watch station to be... I was the officer of the deck, so this is the person who calls the shots in terms of how the ship is going to navigate. The general idea is, as long as you don't run into another vessel on the open seas, and as long as you don't run ashore or run into a pier or something like that, then you've had a good day at sea. Anything else that happens is like, that's water under the bridge, we can move forward. And so we were doing just fine, and I had been working with my entire watch team for it seemed like several weeks, but it was the middle of deployment, so it may have just been like a few days, honestly. But every time we were on watch together for 4 or 5 hours at a time, middle of the night, whenever, I would call man overboard drills. And we wouldn't actually maneuver the ship as though we were going to go pick up a body that had fallen overboard, but we would talk through all the actions for what's going to happen. What do you do when somebody first spots that someone has fallen overboard? How do we sound the alarm? All these things. And we've been working on it, and there were a couple of people on the team who just weren't quite getting it. And then lo and behold, it's the middle of the night. So we're on the midwatch, it's about midnight, and the sensor goes off that says there's a man overboard. We're on deployment, we're doing counter-piracy operations, like we're in the real deal as much as it got real. And here goes the sensor, and we're like, oh man, there goes my nice quiet watch. Well, I'm kind of the worst person to have around in an emergency because I just freeze and I just watch everything that's going on for a few minutes until I'm like, okay, this is how I can help. Which is, not a good place to be when you're the officer of the deck, but whatever, I'm not in the Navy anymore, it's fine. Anyway, so the sensors go off, and we're like, oh crap, there's an actual man overboard. And everybody on my team just launches into action. All the things I had been nagging them about for days on end, they just went for it, including my guys who had had some trouble learning how to do things. And so we heard our conning officer call the rudder order. And he went and threw the rudder over in a certain direction. And my junior officer of the deck and I swiveled our heads around and stared at each other for a second like, oh, nuts, he went the wrong way. We're going to run this guy over, which is what can happen. And we go, buddy, what are you doing? And he goes, well, it's nighttime. I'm doing the turn that you do when it's nighttime. And we were like, oh yeah, we did tell you to do a nighttime turn when it's nighttime. There's all these different things you do, and it just, we in the heat of the moment weren't even thinking to follow that particular action, but all the training had soaked in, and it was like, we did it, and we went and recovered it. It turned out it wasn't a man overboard. I know you were worried about that this whole story. It wasn't. Somebody had accidentally dropped an old life vest over that still had the sensor in it. It was a whole thing. But we did it. Our team did it. We had real life proof that training was effective. So that was a very satisfying moment. You're right.
That does sound like a very satisfying moment. And yes, you are right. I was starting to wonder, did the guy get run over?
I was just letting him sit in the water this whole time while I told you the story. Yeah.
What is the coolest thing that you did while in the Navy?
Okay, so I held a bunch of different jobs while I was on the ship because it turns out that it's true that no good deed goes unpunished. So on average, every 15 months, I was bumped into a new position to take care of some mess that someone else had left somewhere, basically. But I spent about 15 months being the gunnery officer on board the destroyer. So we have what's called a 5-inch gun, and it has big things that go boom, let's say. So I learned all the process for ordering the ammunition and loading it and priming it and setting it into the gun so that we could fire it, and we would do gunnery exercises, and it's great. Go out in the ocean and make great big loud booms. But then when I left the ship, I volunteered to be a naval gunfire liaison officer for the Marine Corps. So I actually went out to California and we did our no-glow training is what they call it. They also like to say it's the most fun you can have with 5 inches, but that's beside the point. And we got to, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. So we went out to a little island out of the coast of California, and I got to stand on the shore and call for live naval gunfire from another destroyer. And so I got to make big booms on the ground from the shore side, which was kind of a neat full circle evolution to get to do. So I think that was probably the coolest thing was... And of course, my dad was delighted because he and my older brother are Marines, and I got to wear Marine Corps digital camouflage and look like I meant something in his terms. So
I just have to go back and point out one thing, and the fact that you said make big booms, which shows your integration into the Marine Corps.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with that.
I love it. Is there one habit or one mindset that you have kept after the Navy that you're kind of happy with?
I think there are a couple of professional habits I developed. I have a philosophy called feed the bear. The bear is your boss, and you always give the boss what the boss wants before you do anything else, because that frees you up to do the work that you need to do on your programs and gives you more time and space to be able to do the work that you know needs doing for your program without constantly having to react to whatever it is the boss wants. And then also... surprises are not good things, and nobody wants to be the senior person with a secret, which is sort of a negative way of looking at management, but you never want to be the only person who knows bad news, and you never want to be the most senior person who knows that something bad is happening with one of your guys or with one of your programs. Communication in the upward and outward direction is always a good thing, because then you never know, somebody above you might be smart enough to do something about it or to help you figure it out. And if they didn't, then hey, you can always say, well, I did tell you that this was happening. And again, getting that off your chest allows you to go back and do the work that you need to manage that. And then there's a whole lot less like jumping around putting out fires when you just manage things. So that's kind of what I learned working on this ship was, the quicker you get the boss what he needs, the quicker the boss leaves you alone and you can go do your work.
And you touched on the communication aspect, and I will say, I'm going to toot your horn a little bit on this. I will say, for anyone who is a student veteran or military affiliated, if you're not getting emails from Melanie Nelson, get them. Stop by the Military Resource Lounge, sign up, and weekly she will send out information. As she said, she doesn't like to sit on information. She likes to put it out for the students to be able to use. And there's a lot of good stuff in there. If you're not getting them and you want to figure out what's going on, she'll fix that. And you can also stop by and look at the TV in the lounge has a PowerPoint presentation that goes through all the things that are going on, including this podcast, including other programs. These are things that we can use, and it just shows how you really enjoy putting information out to where people can actually use it, and I appreciate that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I did not ask for James McNeil to make that public service announcement, but I'm glad he did. Yeah, I do enjoy it. There's a lot of information that comes my way with this. Is a large and growing university, and there's a lot going on, and I want people to be able to take advantage of that. So I try to pull it all together. I know it's information overload. So save it for another time, sit down with a cup of coffee, and sit down and scroll through, click on the links, see what's what. And you can always ask me if you have questions.
Exactly. Is there a habit that you were glad to drop when you left the military?
Getting up early. I'm just going to say it. A lot of people that I have interviewed for this podcast were like, I love the habit of getting up early. I get so much done. I'm not a morning person. I like to get up around 7:30 in the morning, and that's not really being a morning person. And I'm okay with that. I'm making my peace with that.
I can't remember what I said when you asked me that question, but I do get up early. I get up at 5:30 every morning. I don't like it, but I do it. I have to get up early to get my stuff done before coming to campus. I'm not a morning person either without coffee.
Yeah, there's coffee involved, and then I do get up earlier than that unless it's the weekend because I have a little commute to get here and all those things. But if I can possibly avoid it. And by the way, for all those people who have been shamed into thinking that there's some moral benefit to being the early bird, there isn't. It's okay. You too can sleep in, and it will all be fine.
Normally at this point, this is where we would ask, what are you studying at UNCW? However, you are not studying at UNCW. You work here. So let's go back a little bit to when you were in school. What did you study?
So when I was an undergraduate, again, I went in undeclared. I was at the University of South Carolina, go Gamecocks. And I kind of went in and did not have any clue what I wanted to do, but I knew that I liked studying languages. So I took a bunch of different language courses my freshman year, in addition to the courses I was required to take for my ROTC scholarship. And by the end of my freshman year, the only course that I really would say I had truly enjoyed was my Russian course. So I decided to major in Russian. I ended up minoring in French. If I have a regret, it's that I didn't just go back and double major in French because I would have only had to overload a couple semesters and it would have been fine. But at the time, yeah, I liked the Russian program. There were only a few instructors in it. It was a very small major, but we were all kind of like-minded. We were interested in the same things, and it was nice small classes, and it just felt very homey to me. So that's what I ended up majoring in.
I will say that I took the Russian 101 class here, not last year, but the year before last. I keep forgetting this is 2020.
We're getting old, James. We're getting old.
No, I refuse to accept that. But I took the Russian class here, and it was difficult. So my hat is off to you. You're officially smarter than me, but this is the only time you'll ever hear me say that.
I don't think that's necessarily a smarter than thing, but you're right. I should hold on to this moment. I'm going to let it stand for posterity.
So what brought you to UNCW?
So a few different things brought me to UNCW. After my time on the ship and then with the Marines, I took one more assignment at a MEPS down in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. So going back to my college town, essentially. And so I was working with Department of the Army federal employees. Yes, delightful. And I lasted about a year at the military entrance processing station. It's a very, very difficult environment to work in because you're managing people who operate on a very different schedule from what the military operates on, right? And you're dealing with recruiters who have their goals for the year, and then also dealing with a lot of, generally high schoolers who are scared and unsure and don't know what they want to be when they grow up, and they're in and out of your space all the time. And I found it a very difficult environment to work in. So I ended up deciding to go ahead and get out of the military. At that point, I'd also met my husband, who was working up here at New River Air Station. He's actually not a Marine. He's not a veteran. We're okay with that. And he's works up here. And so we were long distance while we were engaged, and then I decided to get out of the military and move up here. And at that point, I started investigating the field of adult education. Funny story, the first time I told anybody in the military that I was going to go into the field of adult education, they heard adult and thought that it ended differently. I'm going to leave that where it is, but it made for a really awkward moment. I'm just going to move on now. So,
think that.
Yeah. I thought I was safe, and then it turned out I was not safe. So I started. We were driving around Wilmington, and I drove past a bright blue building with a sign that said volunteer literacy training here. And I did not know what literacy training was. I was kind of like, why would we have a literacy council when there's this thing called a library? I didn't understand what they were doing. And so I went home and looked them up online. And it turns out that there are people who don't know how to read and who need help learning how to speak English, who are adults by every other sense of the word. And they needed people to help teach them. And so I went and got volunteer training within a couple of months of leaving the military and moving here and settling in the Wilmington area. And I found that I really liked it, so I decided to get my master's in adult education, and I got a certificate in adult basic education, which is that particular field of helping people with their basic skills, learning to read, learning to do the types of math that you need for personal finance and things like that. And I'm actually still with that organization, but at one point I guess what happened was I had a couple of job interviews in the area at PPD here and there, and I just didn't like what I was being offered. I had been a naval officer who was a master of all trades, who could do anything and everything, and all of a sudden I was only getting customer service or executive assistant positions. And I thought, I just don't see that working well with my current attitude. Whether I'm going to be brought low or whether I actually should be in a different position, I don't think these will work for me. So I ended up taking a position with AmeriCorps, which is a national volunteer service program. So you get like a living stipend and a couple of other benefits, but you're basically put in a full-time volunteer position, and you go work for a host agency, and you just do whatever needs doing. So I was stationed here at United Way to do basic financial training, was nominally the idea that I was supposed to be working on for homeless veterans in our area. And so I did that for about a year. And I did all different kinds of things. I stocked a food pantry every Monday morning, and I met with people individually, and I became a couple of people's, basically their social worker, their caseworker, and I drove them all around town to appointments. It turns out that there are a lot of things in this world that people need help with that really only a volunteer would have the time to do. So that was what I did for about a year. It gave me a good introduction to the nonprofit world, to casework kind of management and to social work in general. And then, I started getting my master's degree. I was doing that online. I had a baby, and I was at home with him. And then unexpectedly, a job came open at the Literacy Council where I had been volunteering. And I kind of felt like I didn't want to turn it down because it was working in the ESL program. So that kind of brought my language experience from when I was an undergraduate, and also this idea that I wanted to be teaching adults. So I did that for about 18 months while I wrapped up my master's degree. And then this job came open at UNCW working with military students. And I thought, well, that would be a different population. So I moved on from the Literacy Council and came over here and started teaching students here.
And the Military Resource Lounge has been definitely interesting since you arrived.
Interesting is a wonderful, wonderful word. It can cover so many different things.
If we're going to leave it there.
Yeah.
And so where do you think you'll go from here? Normally this would be a question we would ask students who are moving on, but of course life has a way of changing for all of us. So from here, where do you think you'd like to go?
That is an excellent question. I'm not sure that I'd like to go anywhere. If I'm at UNCW, I do like being part of the Office of Military Affairs. We are, our team really does operate in an atmosphere of growth all the time, which, can sort of be tiring sometimes, but also it's pretty exciting. We constantly generate new ideas and new work for ourselves to do. So I really do enjoy that. There are a couple of other offices at the university that seem interesting to me, so who knows. But I do think I'd like to continue teaching. I also really enjoy curriculum design, kind of things that happen in the background with that. But yeah, I think I will continue most likely to work in the field where I got my master's degree. I don't personally feel the need to go on and get a PhD. Sometimes people ask me that, and I'm like, that sounds like a lot of work. So I think I might just stay at my master's level. But yeah, I like teaching. I like working with people one-on-one, and then teaching bigger classes, and who knows? I
can completely understand where you're coming from. anyone that knows me well knows that post-graduation, of course, I'm going to go to work somewhere, and then I'll be utilizing the online program here to get an MBA. And I've heard quite a few people ask, why not get your PhD? Because I don't want one.
Yeah, at a certain point, it really is enough. Like you can still be a lifelong learner. My master's is in lifelong learning and adult education, so of course I would say that. But you can still be a lifelong learner without doing formal education programs.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it has been a pleasure having you here on the Military Seahawk podcast. Again, like I said before, this is brought to you by Hawk Talk. Make sure to check them out. And once again, this is a great place to come for the university, UNCW. We're glad that you are here, even though you are not a current student here.
Yeah, thanks for using my own questions against me, James.
Hey, you gave me the best questions to use. Why not use what I've got? Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening, and have a great day.